Once upon a time, there was a talented young writer named J.K. Rowling, who, as I'm sure you're all aware, began the worldwide phenomenon known as Harry Potter. Would you believe, however, that according to her bibliography, this brainwave began 25 years ago? That's older than me, for God's sake. What does interest me, however, is that this series is something that I have grown up beside, watching the tale unfold as I myself have grown up. I'm a lot more skilled in the analysis of films as opposed to an avid reader, so most of my study in this video will be on the film. This is not to say I haven't read or enjoyed the book, but I will draw comparisons from both nonetheless. In this video I'm going to be discussing a variety of things, from the film's positives and negatives, changes from the book that have been made in order for me to be classed as that guy who complains about the film always beginning with, "But in the books, ... So, without further ado, let's take a stab at this tidal wave of literature turned Hollywood experience and see what we can find inside. Something that was somewhat amiss from a book reader's perspective was the opening, a day in the life of Vernon Dudley. To be brutally honest, the film does a better job of opening up the story of Harry Potter. The book has a very quirky charm to it which I can totally get on board with, like the wizard celebrating during Vernon's day at work all of a sudden, which he completely disregards. However, this incredible score from John Williams, the dark spooky atmosphere created by the cinematography gives out an incredible chill that has sucked me into a story within the first minute of the film. What is missing from this minute though? Dialogue. A setup like this is ideal for a film for this scale, and it does a damn good job of it. It's interesting, however, that in the film there is no mention of the wizard parties that occur in celebration of the fall of the Dark Lord. This may have been another attempt at adding mystery to the event at hand, especially as Hagrid explains to Harry why he's so celebrated later on. Hagrid arrives on the scene in his mahoosive motorbike. In the book it states, however, that he got it off Sirius Black. Another interesting difference from the book is Dumbledore's character. He seems a lot more fun and carefree in the book. For example, he has a scar on his knee which is a perfect map of the London Underground, and his impetuous announcement of nitwit, blubber, oddment and tweak, which bears no importance but adds to his character. Richard Harris, however, has taken a more subtle and wise old man approach to his characterization, which doesn't let his emotions get the better of him. Something I do approve of in the film is not giving a name to Dumbledore's Deluminator, because in the book it has a ridiculously unimaginative name, the Put Outer, which is silly because it can rekindle light sources too. As Dumbledore lays Harry down for 10 years of misery with the Dursleys, and this is where our first major issue with Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone comes in, continuity. There are ridiculous amounts of mistakes in this movie that cannot go unnoticed. From baby Harry's lack of scar in one shot that appears out of nowhere in the next, to Ron's magically changing haircut, it ruins a fantastic film. It's ridiculously nitpicky, but it's shoddy filmmaking and cannot be ignored. We cut to 10 years later to Dudley's birthday, who in my opinion does a brilliant job at playing a spoilt child.
Wake up, Potter! We're going to the zoo!
In fact, I would definitely say all of the Dursleys are very well cast in this film. Richard Griffiths and Fiona Shaw really grasp the hideous aunt and uncle that basically enslave Harry as their little minion who lives under the stairs. It's interesting that Rowling has already brought up two social issues within the first two chapters of her books: paranoia, Vernon and Petunia's rejection of anything not ordinary, and slavery. However, we don't really see much of this put to play. We only see this oversized second-hand pajamas that slightly resemble rags, and his living conditions, where in which he cooks for the Dursleys whilst living in the cupboard under the stairs. These aren't exactly awful living conditions, but he is still trapped in the Dursleys' house, and he knows no other way of living. Speaking of Harry, I think that Daniel Radcliffe's interpretation of his character is a bit bland. He's not really much of an interesting character to watch, whereas the books portray him as somebody with an attitude, recognizing his entrapment and a desire to escape. In the film, he appears to have just given up. Noticeably during the film, we don't see Dudley's best friend, Piers Polkiss, attending the zoo with them. He's not exactly a memorable character from the book, but it's interesting that Dudley, despite his awful reputation to us, is more popular than Harry at school, whereas in the films, we have no information about whether he goes to school or not. We get to the rather pivotal scene of Harry talking to the snake. What I like about this scene as opposed to the others when Harry talks to snakes is that he's talking English to them and they understand him. I know there aren't anybody around to witness him speaking parcel tongue, but I find it more interesting to watch than hearing him speak some edited snake language that sounds cringy and inaudible. Something that both the film and book get wrong is that the snake winks when snakes don't have eyelids, but I'm sure you probably read that on the internet somewhere and already know about this. Something else that's missing from the films is Dudley's lack of physical abuse towards Harry. At this point right here, Harry should be punched in the ribs. I can only assume that he wasn't punched here for fear of getting a rating from the BBFC of higher than a PG. When Harry gets a letter from Hogwarts in the post, I can't quite understand why he doesn't just throw it into his cupboard to read later, as opposed to reading it in front of his villainous family. But alas, the young mind is filled with temptation, and his daily routine of passing the letters to his uncle prevents him from thinking otherwise. When Vernon sees Harry's letters in the books, he bursts into a form of panic, as if it was ridden with disease. However, in the film, it just seems to drive him quite insane. Rowling is playing on the paranoia of the nuclear family, and the makers of the film want to play on Vernon's obsessive desire to keep Harry as his slave via the cinematography, Griffith's performance, and his messy hair in the "no post on Sunday" scene, which in my opinion is one of the best scenes in the entire film. The build-up, the music, the general aesthetics of the scene make it entertaining and riveting to watch. There are two scenes that were deleted in the follow-up to the Dursleys and Harry moving to the shack, one involving Dudley in his Smeltings uniform and another where Petunia finds letters to Harry inside her carton of eggs. Both scenes fit really well in terms of plot and don't necessarily have anything wrong with them, but I feel that the editors removed these scenes for pacing reasons. Despite the threatening music and dramatic entrance, Hagrid's first line summarizes his character perfectly.
Sorry about that.
It's very interesting that we don't know either how he got to the hut on the rock. He doesn't come by bike, otherwise he and Harry would have ridden back on it, and there isn't a second boat, so he couldn't have rowed there. In the book, it states that Harry and Hagrid take the only boat back to shore, leaving the Dursleys on the rock. So, how did the Dursleys get back in time for the Chamber of Secrets? Unless there miraculously is a telephone rigged up to the hut, which I highly doubt considering Dursley wanted a place away from civilization. They should have stayed there for the rest of their days as punishment for their mistreatment of Harry for all those years. More on this will be covered at the end of this video when I cover the film's ending. Casting Robbie Coltrane as Hagrid was an excellent decision by the casting team, as his performance grasps the essence of Hagrid perfectly. In this scene, Radcliffe is given more dialogue to play around with, which unfortunately blasts through another issue I have with this film: the child acting. For example, you'd have thought Dudley and Harry would have been so terrified for an 8.5-foot man slamming his way through a big wooden door that they would be in tears. This is probably more of a Hollywood trope as opposed to a criticism of their performances, but it would still look better to see them in a state of shock. I'll place more examples throughout the review, but just watch how Harry tries to explain himself and see how he can't quite create any emotion.
No. You've made a mistake. I mean, I can't be a wizard. I mean, I'm just Harry. Just Harry.
When Harry and Hagrid arrive at the Leaky Cauldron, Hagrid is asked by the bartender if he wants a drink. This is a part of Hagrid's backstory that I think is completely overlooked in the film, that he has an alcohol problem. In the book, he claims that he gave out the secret of how to calm Fluffy, the three-headed dog, to Professor Quirrell because of his drinking, and thus feels responsible for Harry's endeavours from the third-floor corridor. In the film, it's shrugged off as an event of chance that Quirrell gets access to the Mirror of Erised. Our David and Goliath characters then pass into Diagon Alley, which is so beautifully designed and introduced amazingly with the score that it takes one's breath away. The set designers certainly have my admiration for these scenes, as I feel so engrossed in the potentials of what this magical world could produce. When we enter Gringotts, I once again commend the attention to detail in this room, especially considering the close resemblance of the book description portrayed on screen. One of the biggest complaints I hear about book differences is that of Harry and Malfoy getting their robes fitted. It's nice to see a bit of backstory in this part between the two of them, but all we really gather from Malfoy is that he hates people of non-magic families. This isn't quite so explicitly alluded to in the film, but the book gives us some insight into his Nazi-esque ideologies, which makes us hate Malfoy more than just because he's a dick. Harry enters Ollivander's wand shop alone, and an immediate difference I've found from the book is that there's a lot less dialogue, not to mention Hagrid isn't in there either. Ollivander ordinarily rambles on about the size and wood types of wands, which becomes more important later on in the series for wizard duels and disarming rules. The introduction of Ollivander in the film is very interesting to watch because John Hurt's impressive performance creates an awkward atmosphere as Harry stands around wondering what to do with the wands he is handed. The tone of this scene is very memorable as well, thanks once again to the score but the lighting too, when Ollivander gives Harry his destined wand. When I see Daniel Radcliffe being personified as this messiah-like character, I can't help but think about the effect that this could have on young audiences at the time. Let us not forget Daniel's father worked with David Heyman and his mother was a casting agent. It seems almost too convenient that he got in just based on his talent as an actor. But on to my main point, he could easily be seen as a role model for young people, and considering the popularity of this series, is it possible that these films have created a form of narcissism in young people? I would delve into this subject a little deeper if I was solely covering the issue itself, but just a little something for all those watching to think about. When we get to King's Cross Station and Harry begins his search for platform 9 3/4, I can't help but wonder why there aren't hundreds of other potential wizards and witches passing through the gate. Not only that, this is King's Cross Station. Why isn't it absolutely packed with passengers? If it was busier, this would explain why nobody does see people going through the gate. But as there clearly isn't, why isn't anybody making a fuss about it? I understand that some wizards make their way there via broomsticks, but first years can't use broomsticks, so surely the station guard has been asked the same question by several other people during his time working at King's Cross Station, and thus I wonder why he acts like a total dick to Harry. It would make more sense if he said something like, "Don't know, mate. Ask that ginger lot over there, they look like they know what they're talking about." When we do see Harry get onto the platform, it's a nice reminder for me that there once was a time where not everything in Harry Potter was made entirely of CG. The train looks bloody amazing, and the first time seeing it is a wonderful experience to see every time. Something that the book takes more advantage of is less attention on Harry. The film can't go 5 seconds without a shot of Harry, whereas we have quite a few moments where we see other characters getting some depth and development. Take Fred and George, for example, who all we know about from the film is that they are easily mistakable, whereas in the book they meet Harry up close and treat him like an animal in the zoo, as Molly puts it. This is more interesting, and I would like to have seen more of this instead of a need to focus entirely on the main character. I know the story is titled Harry Potter, but it's also about the world and the other people around him. However, I must come to another issue I have with Harry's character when he buys everything off the trolley when it's offered to him. I'm not sure if Harry buys everything out of his pity for Ron, which, by the way, the book does a better job of explaining Ron's family's poverty, or the fact that he was deprived of nice things and money as a slave to the Dursleys. Either way, I feel some relatability towards his character is lost when he feels that nobody else on the train should have a share of the sweets just because he has a ton of cash at his disposal. Our introduction to Hermione is excellent as she enters the carriage. She's observant, knowledgeable, and Watson does an excellent job at portraying the stuck-up smartass. Another moment of appraisal I have is for the grand introduction and our first shot of Hogwarts. The camera movement building up to it, the composition. It's like I'm seeing a painting or something incredible before me. The music once again does its job perfectly and has a very homely feel to it, which brings excitement to audience members alongside the reaction shots of all the new students. McGonagall guides the students into the Grand Hall, and I'm very glad the Sorting Hat doesn't sing a ridiculous, childish song about the houses in front of the whole school like it does in the book. Imagine being in your 6th or 7th year at Hogwarts and having to listen to that ridiculous song each year. However, we aren't given any individuality about the two forgettable houses in the films, only that Gryffindor seem to be good and Slytherin seem to be bad. The other two are just ignored, unlike how the Hat song describes them in the book. It would have been a nice inclusion, but nobody memorable gets put into Ravenclaw anyway, so why don't they just have the houses of the brave, the pussies, and the evil? Another little aspect of the first sighting of the school hall is the teachers' table that holds considerably more teachers than the later years have. Just watch these teachers, who I don't remember seeing in my entire time of watching Harry Potter. Who's that guy? Who are these two? Who's this, that, and that old guy? Everybody gets settled and the ghosts appear. One of the key ghosts from the story itself was titled Peeves, and I think all book readers know where I'm going with this, but when I heard it was to be played by Rick Mayall and that they even shot scenes with him in, I found myself bitterly disappointed, because for Christ's sake, he was in the games, not in the films. The games, ladies and gentlemen, those awful rip-offs that nobody picked up ever again because of poor functionality, and because, let's face it, films turned into usually end up being just dreadful and looking awful. You know, for something that could have been great that was removed, I'm glad this adaptation doesn't contain the Hogwarts song. Oh wait, that was a deleted scene in Goblet of Fire. I am not kidding, the link is in the description for any of you that want a good laugh at the ridiculousness of it all. Moving on, the students follow Percy into the grand staircase chamber, which still holds out magnificently. It feels so chasm-like, and that you could fall at any time if you're not careful or on the right staircase. Harry and his classmates begin lessons in school, and we are denied 3 classes that the book details very briefly. There are no astronomy lessons, though I doubt they would be of any interest to anybody that isn't a centaur. Herbology isn't introduced until film 2, which I must say is better placed there because of the use of mandrakes and the history of magic. This is the only one that I think would have benefited being in the film for those that want to know more about the universe surrounding Harry Potter. The potions class begins, and we have a rather memorable monologue from Snape, played by Alan Rickman. He does an excellent job of appearing as the anti-villain, despite his socially negative appearance. Interestingly, there is a whole segment at the end of the scene that is missing from the final cut. Harry retorts at Snape, who in turn puts Harry in his place rather dramatically and intensely. I can only assume this part was cut for length purposes, and I know Rickman does like to take his time when performing as Snape, but my gripe comes with this mainly as he sits down in front of Harry. He looks like he loses all his authority when this happens. But it's cut from the movie, so it doesn't matter! Anyway, the mail arrives and Neville gets a remember all, and I can't help but feel this is a really pointless gift. It reminds you when you've forgotten something by glowing red, but the human mind forgets things all the time. For example, I can't remember the last film I watched on VHS. I've forgotten it. Therefore, a remember all is going to glow red for me, despite I really couldn't care less about what the last VHS tape I watched was. Not only that, but it makes no attempt to give you any clues about what you might have forgotten about, thus making it bloody useless. Harry Potter becomes the new seeker for his house after some dramatic events, and Harry and Ron are challenged to a duel by Malfoy. In the books, actually, meh. Look you, Mr. I've read the books and I'm going to complain about the films forever. I'm trying my best here. Besides, the duels don't need a full mention and description until film 2 anyway, because a duel doesn't actually take place in the first book. So I am glad there wasn't a mention of one of these in the film. However, it does annoy me that they reach the forbidden floor by accident, instead of having a purpose of seeking Malfoy and Crabbe. Also, you can see the movable staircase wobble as they and the camera move up towards the door frame. Anyway, when they get to Fluffy's room, I can't help but wonder why there are locked doors in Hogwarts in the first place. I know there are several rooms ahead of Fluffy to overcome, but if first year students can unlock rooms with a spell from Standard Book of Spells, and yet dormitories can be protected by spoken passwords, why on earth is Fluffy guarded by nothing but a locked door! God, imagine if these three had been eaten by the dog. Hogwarts would have been sued up the arse by their parents. Well, except for Harry's. The trio runs back to the common room, and we have a lovely piece of dialogue from Hermione, who then slams the door in their faces. We should have had a reaction shot from Ron and Harry, and then cut to the next scene, without this ridiculous line that I cringe at every time.
She needs to sort out her priorities.
The rules of Quidditch are explained to Harry, though they seem rather silly and not well thought out. For example, we know the snitch counts for 150 points when caught and ends the game. In a situation where one of the teams is 160 points ahead of the other, if the losing team's seeker then catches the snitch, then he or she is to blame for the team's loss. The seekers are also left without much to do when they can't find the snitch, and this is seen in the actual Quidditch match later in the film when Harry is seen roaming around not doing a lot. I think it would make more sense if there was a time limit or a score limit of say 150 points, so you wouldn't have these ridiculous Quidditch matches that go on for months. After Quirrell then performs the most memorable quote in the entire movie, we see a lot of hilarious reaction shots of the children looking traumatized before our eyes. I don't know what inspired Mr. Columbus to show us these, but they're quite laughable to say the least. When we get to the bathroom, we have quite an interesting amount of odd occur in this scene. Firstly, Hermione is supposed to have been crying. So why does it look like the makeup team have had her freshly prepared for this scene? Second, why is Hermione's pride overcoming her fear? She doesn't seem at all fazed by the fact a gigantic troll is smashing the room around her, only to scream and look at Harry as if to say, well, come on then, hurry up and save me, God! And thirdly, why on earth McGonagall doesn't just award Gryffindor 5 points instead of faffing about with deducting 5 and then adding 10? I don't even know why she even begins to think about taking points away from her own house. At the end of this scene, we would ordinarily have seen the three agreeing that they would be good friends from then on, but it was cut.
That's a shame.
Quidditch begins, and I'm glad Lee Jordan isn't as biased and horny in the films as he is in the books, because it got really annoying to read his dialogue. As soon as the players enter the field, the music and visuals are exciting to watch, as well as the sweeping wide shots of the arena giving off this huge scale of the sport. We see that Wood is useless at his own job and should probably have been replaced quite a few years ago, as he always seems to be knocked off his broom. When we soon find that there are several characters that are in peril that I don't care about, I wonder why Harry couldn't have been part of the quaffle action just so we could feel some tension in this scene. This is why I find the parts where Harry is dangling from his broom more interesting than the rest of the match. Christmas shows up and he's rudely awakened once again by his cousin.
Wake up, cousin! We're going to the zoo!
Harry receives a 50p piece from his aunt and uncle. Ah, that's in the book! That was funny and witty! And I agree. But how on earth would the Dursleys know where to send it to? All they know is that he's gone to Hogwarts. There's no returning address on the envelopes, and I don't even know why they'd go through the bother of sending him anything now that they're rid of him. When Harry puts on the invisibility cloak, I need to once again commend John Williams for the one piece of music that sounds like wind blowing through glass that gives me one of the most chilling sensations as a child and still remains today. This piece of music is so scary. It gives the film a new layer of tension that isn't seen in many other films. This builds up to an incredibly scary moment for anybody who hasn't seen the film before, where Harry opens a book with a screaming face inside. This part, as well as the reveal of Voldemort at the end of the film, always made me question why this film was given a PG, because this stuff is terrifying for kids. Then again, the BBFC are renowned for making strange, restrictive decisions, so I shouldn't really question their bizarre logic. Harry escapes the library and the intensity doesn't stop there. We see a lot of claustrophobic shots of Harry running through the corridor, making sure he isn't caught by Mrs. Norris. This camera work is remarkable because sneaking around when you should be in bed is almost a childhood nightmare, and the negatively nostalgic atmosphere is excellent to watch. When Harry visits the Mirror of Erised, we have a close-up on the letters carved into the frame. I'm glad this little piece of detail was included because It's just a sentence written backwards.
In the book, Harry gets consumed by the mirror.
You're right. And there's a deleted scene just for it, and I honestly think it would have made Harry's compulsive need to be with the mirror more concrete had that scene been placed in the final cut. We come to our final deleted scene where we have some truly awful child acting from Seamus and Harry.
I don't appreciate the insinuation, Longbottom. Besides, if anyone cares to notice, my eyebrows have completely grown back.
However, it's not necessary for the plot either, as Hermione finds the Nicholas Flamel book in the library after this scene. Plus, Neville's hopping around is just cringy as hell. Speaking of the next scene, did you know that there are genuine differences in the films of the Sorcerer's and the Philosopher's Stone? For some bloody reason, they thought it'd be a good idea to shoot two of certain scenes only to change the script slightly. Just watch this nonsense.
Of course, here it is. Nicholas Flamel is the only known maker of the Philosopher's Stone, of the Sorcerer's Stone.
I really don't understand why the titles are different. It's not like any of the other films were titled differently for some strange reason. If somebody can explain this to me, that would be great.
I don't care about that. I want to know where the second Quidditch match was.
Where Ron and Malfoy get into a pointless fight that justifies violence just because you're being teased?
But what about all the revising and exams that are ignored?
Despite the only restriction there is that the three might not make it into the next year, even though the second film was made less than a year after the first film was released.
Oh, shut up! Don't these filmmakers understand that their films need to impress me and live up to all of my expectations? Meh!
Anyway, the three turn up at Hagrid's stone house, and the CG dragon egg hatches. Something boring that film viewers won't want to know about is that dragons have been outlawed by Warlock's Convention of 1709. So Malfoy had more to dob the three in for in the book than just the fact that they were out of bed. Once again, McGonagall proves herself the worst head of Gryffindor ever by taking away 50 house points from her own house. Surely it would have made more sense for Malfoy to tell Snape over all of the other teachers. It makes even less sense in the books, however, as McGonagall takes away 150 points, and the three have to suffer being hated by the entire school. So as punishment for hanging out with Hagrid, our first years are forced to hang out with Hagrid once again. They hunt down the killer of the unicorn, with Draco and Harry finding Voldemort feasting on the poor creature. The dark atmosphere is once again chilling thanks to the soundtrack and mise-en-scène, and this is very memorable for being Voldemort's first, in inverted commas, appearance. Granted, this is just Quirrell in an uncontrollable state, but it's still terrifying to watch, and it's awesome seeing Firenze scaring him away. It's a shame we don't see the other centaurs arguing and debating about Firenze's actions, as it gives away to more potential story about them in the future. The three return to finish their exams and visit Hagrid. It's a shame that it's painfully obvious in this scene that they are on a blue screen. Hagrid gives up the secret of how to calm Fluffy. Their transfiguration and potions teachers induce some paranoia into the students before they decide it's a good idea to stop the theft of the Philosopher's Stone themselves. That is, until Neville stops them in their tracks. I feel now is the best time to talk about Neville, because he's a fantastic character that is vastly overlooked in the films. But from reading the books, I feel there is too much of him. I know, it sounds like nothing seems to please me, but to me it seems like he's nothing but comic relief in the books. He shows up at so many moments in the books, he might as well be the fourth member of Harry's Gryffindor clan along with Ron and Hermione. In the films, he just shows up at the end like he's Lando Calrissian, ready to get them into even more trouble because he wants to prove to them that he can stand up to them. Thankfully, he's easily put down by Hermione, so the plot can reach a conclusion. He swayed where he stood and then fell flat on his face, stiff as a board. The dog scene is pretty cool. It's better than in the book because the children are forced down the hole instinctively instead of somebody playing the flute. I think this is just a distinguishing feature of a film as opposed to good literature in the book, but there's more tension when the music stops playing in the film, giving it more time for the dog to shine and become a threat. Devil's Snare comes after this, wherein which Ron and Harry are told to relax. Harry looks more like he's been stuck on the toilet for an unpleasant amount of of time as opposed to being relaxed. Even the snare can recognise bad child acting when it wants to, as it silences Ron. They reached to the end of the passageway and saw before them a brilliantly lit chamber. I don't have much more to say on this scene. It's pretty decent and it's over in a flash. Yeah, well done Columbus, 10 out of 10, would watch again. Then we come to what is probably my favourite scene in the film aesthetically. The messy broken chessboard, the brilliant lighting and the score use here really emphasises the epic scale of the chessboard itself. Myself as a child would always look forward to this scene obsessively because it's so action-packed and dramatic. However, this does not excuse me from examining it with a critical eye. I will never understand why the hell Ron gets knocked out when the Queen doesn't even touch him. In the book, he gets backhanded like a little bitch by the Queen, which makes sense. In the film, the sword goes through the chess piece, not Ron. Does the steam scald him or something? Your guess is as good as mine, people.
No. Ron, no!
What is it?
He's going to sacrifice himself.
No, you can't! There must be another way!
Wow, you all look so concerned. Why not just carry on reeling your lines loudly and annoyingly without any facial expressions? Either way, the final sequence of the sword falling from Harry's checkmate gives me the shivers, and I will always commend this scene despite its odd moments from the children. There should be 2 more puzzles for Harry and Hermione to solve as they appear in the books. One involves walking past another dead troll, and the other is Snape's potion riddle. I'm sure there's somebody out there that can explain the ins and outs of this room, but I can't be bothered. I'm not ashamed to say that I'm glad it wasn't the penultimate room because nothing will ever beat the chess room. Now we come to the finale, where a very well crafted twist is put in place as the result of great writing. Quirrell being Voldemort's servant, not Snape. Quirrell's true self is very horrific and impulsive, just the way I like my bad boys. We have a lot of exposition explaining Quirrell's position before he unwraps the turban from his head, which is a moment that would terrify children globally forever. Richard Bremer is brilliant at showing Voldemort as this parasitic and tormenting face, and the visual effects department do a smashing job at creating a horror pasted on the back of a bald man's head. Speaking of visual effects department, I know I've slapped them about a bit throughout this review, but I need to emphasize there are a lot of effects that still hold out throughout the film. Most of the animals, including the centaur, look fantastic. Even in 2001 they understood motion blur on CGI looks the best. Neville crashing around on his broomstick in the Quidditch match still look amazing. I am very happy that the film wasn't too ambitious on the CGI because the film produces a lot of authenticity in its set design as opposed to a heavy reliance on green screens like a lot of modern high-octane fantasies do. The Hobbit. Harry then disintegrates Quirrell by the power of his mother's love, which is a nice little message for the kids to take home with them, showing them that being a loving person makes you crush those that want stones of immortal life. Anyway, Voldemort's ghost runs away and Harry wakes up in hospital. This scene between Harry and Dumbledore is rather touching to say the least, and with good performances and camera angles aside from the over-shoulder shots make exposition a lot easier to soak in. So despite this scene being just dialogue driven, it is still interesting to watch. But then everything goes entirely tits up. Dumbledore, a previous Gryffindor member, goes absolutely bleeding crazy with points being dished out just so his house can win. He awards a whopping 170 points to Harry Potter and crew for taking out Voldemort. I understand that they stopped a potentially life-threatening wizard coming back to power, but surely their efforts should be recognised past house points. I mean, for God's sake, it's not like the winning house gets anything for winning. Why aren't they put down in the history books or given individual awards? I'm also aware that Slytherin is full of dickheads and that the scoring system is corrupt as hell. McGonagall. But there is a clear win to Slytherin. They must have attributed something towards Wizard Academia, and their efforts shouldn't be shot down by a biased head teacher. I'm not impressed, Dumbledore, at all. Yep, I feel cheated too, mate. Wait, hang on a minute. Why am I sympathising with you? You're a dick. The unfairness doesn't stop here, however. I really really don't know why they allow Harry to be sent back to the Dursleys whatsoever. If Dumbledore has learned anything about Harry, it's that he hates being with them. They'll lock him up and try their hardest not to get him back at Hogwarts again. Hogwarts will be empty anyway, so what's the harm in Harry staying there? Jesus! Just teach him how to conjure food and drink out of thin air in the Great Halls, and he needn't worry about being bullied and imprisoned by his awful family. This last part with Hagrid and Harry is very touching, but we wouldn't need it if he wasn't being sent. I give up. I fucking give up. So, did it suck? I'm aware I've been very harsh on this wonderful piece of film, and for that I will probably never forgive myself, because I do enjoy this film. It's a very good example of quality fantasy filmmaking. The scale, the emotion, the story, all excellent. And for a first attempt at something that had become such a cult hit at the time, this film does a cracking job, and I give it an 8 out of 10.